Dying is the most ordinary thing. Newspapers list pages and pages of obituary and funeral notices to which no unaffected person pays any attention. And yet, in an individual case, it is the most incomprehensible thing because it crushes the little bit of meaning that has been arduously gathered in a lifetime and disperses it to the four winds. Where the death of a valued and beloved person makes its presence felt, all meaning of his life is put in brackets by it. The validity of this meaning is not definitive, but is fragmentary at best. We see islands of meaning in an infinite sea of meaninglessness. And the view beyond is barred to us, says Goethe. All peeking behind the curtain, all guesswork, spiritism, the teaching of reincarnation, and whatever else men might contrive, will not reveal the mystery. Even less so materialism, extending the chain of these fragments of meaning into the future in the hope that it may someday become something whole, is more than utopian. We have to content ourselves with the fragmentary. But does this not contain a contradiction? That we know of something like meaning but are unable to trace the line of it? First, we need to deal with this contradiction that is inherent in all human existence and appears to be irreconcilable from a purely human perspective. But if Christianity presents itself as the salvation for man, we need to hear what solution it offers to this, in the end, unbearable contradiction. We will do this in a concluding third point. In between, in the middle part, however, an attempt will be made to find something in human existence to which the Christian solution can refer. For if there were nothing, we would not see how what is Christian could connect to our existence at all. This starting point, admittedly, will become fully visible and effective only when what is Christian itself becomes evident. Otherwise, it remains open to dangerous misinterpretations. And so begins Hans Urs von Balthasar's book, Life Out of Death, Meditations on the Paschal Mystery. And Hans Urs von Balthasar can't be with us because he's gone to his reward, but my friend Larry Chapp, who happens to be a Hans Urs von Balthasar scholar.
That's right. That's right. I'm in the house.
He's in the. Well, it's not really a house.
Yeah. We're in your shop.
In the shop, in the
That's
coffee
right.
shop. So, Larry and I have done a couple of podcasts dealing with different books, trying to penetrate suffering and our mortal condition. And this book, I was looking for one that we could talk about, and this book came across my radar, and it is just very, very rich. It's a small little book. It's like 90 pages, and it's perfect because not only is it called Life Out of Death, but it's also written by someone that Larry knows a lot about, spent a lot of time with.
Well, a lot of time reading. Not a lot of time with personally. A lot of time with his theology and his works. I did my, doctoral dissertation on him and so forth. But you're right. It's a densely packed little book, and I think it's pretty accessible for the average educated Catholic to read. And you and I both have almost every word underlined. And you start underlining and you can't stop because it's so good.
And I would say that I'm slightly below average educated Catholic. And so the first time through, I was picking up there's a lot of treasures in this book. But it took me a second reading to start to really see it in its cohesive whole and how it flowed from one part to the other. And it's broken into three sections. And they are in the table of contents, which with my fingers I can
Life into death, life out of death, and united through death.
Okay, life into death, life out of death, united through death.
And we're going to begin with life into death.
Yeah, which is in three parts: existence and contradiction, serenity, and Christ. And just with that introduction, talking about the obituaries, which of course we do. I mean, now that we have the internet, you go to a newspaper or something like that, and there's just lists of them. And of course, with the work I do, I'm a coffin maker. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing them all the time, and I'm drawn to know people and to read their stories. But it's such a common thing to see that unless their last name is Daly or maybe one of I tend not to. Or if I'm building a casket for someone, then I read the obituaries and know the richness of the human lives that are pertinent. But otherwise, just all that incredible, experience and meaning and potency that was once with us on earth is like he says, it becomes what? An island?
Well, yeah, I mean, the fact is there's nothing more common to the human condition than birth and death. We're all born and we all die. And yet, for some reason, we take very little note of the death part. It just seems like we don't really want to attend that much to this or that anonymous person who has died. Like you said, you read the obituaries in the paper and it's like, wow, 99, that was old. Or, oh, geez, this kid was only 12 and he died. So you might be interested in reading something like that. But beyond that, it doesn't touch you, it doesn't concern you, and so you just sort of gloss over it.
Yeah.
And yet for the person involved, it's the ultimate.
It's everything.
Everything, yeah.
And there's so much. There's no way we could keep it all in our heads, as far as all these biographies, that contradiction. And, we'll talk about this more with his...
he says it takes basically everything in our entire life and crushes them and disperses it to the four winds, So that's the great mystery of death that we confront right off the bat as a human being, that it seems as if no matter what we do in this life, death is the great leveler. Here he doesn't say the great leveler, he says the great disperser.
Yeah, so with that, let's move on to existence and contradiction, because that's right what he goes into talking about and fleshing out here in chapter 1. The little child opens wide eyes at the world. What he sees, forms, colors, sounds, he does not comprehend. The phenomena are neither familiar nor strange to him because he cannot yet apply them to himself. His self is not yet disclosed to him. Whatever consciousness he possesses lies halfway between subject and object. Now this is the miracle among all these miracles of the beginning, that one day the mother's smile is recognized by the child as a sign of his acceptance in the world, and that the center of his own self is disclosed to him as he returns the smile. He finds himself because he has been found. And because a you has found him, all the he that also surrounds him can be included in the relationship of familiarity. This is true for all the years the child grows up in the security of the family. Whenever something strange is added, it is, if possible, included in the sphere of the familiar. Otherwise, it is ignored. Nature and spirit are together in harmony.
I'm going to stop you there. This is a very central Balthasarian theme. The theme of the child that is awakened to its sense of self by the smile, he always says, of the mother, but obviously could be of the father as well. And the reason why this is important to him is he wants to emphasize the fact that when you're an infant, you don't really have a self-concept at all. You're not aware of yourself as you're looking at your own arm waving in the air, for example. Oh, that's my arm. There's no concept of me. In fact, the point he makes is that we only come to a sense of ourselves when we are first encountering the other. The first thing that really fills the infant's mind is the face of the mother, the face of the father, the face of somebody other than themselves. So what Balthasar is trying to point out here is that human beings are not first individuals who then develop and reach out to other people once we know ourselves. No, we only become individuals precisely in and through our relationship with others, which only underscores the fundamentally relational, other-oriented nature of our personhood.
Wow. So we're born sort of out of a communion.
Yeah, we're born into communion and out of communion. Wow. Absolutely. We're not born these little isolated individuals who then come to other people later.
Well, it's physically true if we think about the origin of an individual human being too. Obviously, right? So when he capitalizes, and because a you has found him, all the he that also surrounds him, is he just emphasizing?
He wants to say the you. It goes back to one of his big influences was a Jewish thinker named Martin Buber, who wrote a famous book called I Vow. And Buber, as a Jewish theologian and thinker, characterized the relationship of the human being with God as an I-thou relationship, that God is the infinite other, but who is also the infinite friend, the infinite,
so it's when he capitalizes the you and the he.
Yes.
He's saying that God is in that in some ways?
Yes. So This is precisely then why we later come to view all of existence as in some sense addressing me. When we look out into the world, we see a world that is talking to me, addressing me.
So that's not just totally hubris. There's something to
it's
that.
not.
Okay.
There's something to it. We feel, as he says in some other writings, we feel invited in. We feel invited into the party, so to speak, the party of existence. We don't feel like we construct it, that we make it, that we're all in. We feel invited in. And ultimately, of course, the ultimate invitee we come to see is God. Wow. And that the invitation comes from God. And so this is central to Balthasar's understanding of personhood here in our relationship with God.
So when we criticize someone by saying, he thinks he's the center of the universe, that is wrong. But at the same time, it's not based on complete arrogance. There is a touch of truth to that. Like the universe is for you in some ways.
Well, I mean, even physically, there's no center to the universe, physically. It's all equidistant everywhere. And so the point is, in some sense, I am the center of the universe, as long as I understand that I'm also not. Yeah. That I'm only at center precisely because I recognize that everybody else is a center, too.
Right. Well,
multi-centered.
Awesome.
Anyway, continue with your reading, sir.
Puberty brings a first questioning of this harmony. For the first time, the maturing person realizes his uniqueness as a person and thus experiences a loneliness hitherto unknown. He knows himself to be raised above the purely natural. He is not merely a specimen of a genus like the animals. And with the discovery of his uniqueness, an as yet undefined dreamlike horizon of a meaningful whole that would correspond to his personhood presents itself to the young person. But what develops at the same time is his sexual maturity, which introduces him to the life cycle of the genus. The first experiences of love will be the unconscious effort to connect both. The thrilling side of the experience will at first cover up the contradiction that will, however, show all the more glaringly in the disillusionments that necessarily follow. The disillusioned one feels himself betrayed not only by his partner, but, on a deeper level, by his own nature. His nature demands from him, and will not cease to do so throughout his life, that he inscribes something permanent onto the surface of a transitory material. And that's what this section is dealing with.
I mean, this is the key right here. In fact, I wrote in the margins here, key. This is the key point to the whole thing, the paradox, or maybe not even the paradox, the contradiction of our existence. We feel ourselves addressed by existence. We feel ourselves to have some sort of missional importance in life. And yet, in the midst of all this experience of transitoriness, and yet somehow we try to strike this impossible deal where I try to inscribe onto the transitory nature of my existence something of permanent and lasting value. But we can't. Wow. We can't. It's impossible.
Yeah. All those obituaries, every single person felt that to some degree, is that desire for something that doesn't end.
So and it doesn't have to be anything grandiose or, like I'm Johann Sebastian Bach and I need to write, as many pieces of wonderful music as it could be something simple. I want to live on in my children. Yeah. I want to have 37 kids and live on in 800 grandkids and so on.
Even that.
Yeah, even that. I think it was somebody who said, and this is key here too, that you all of us, every single one of us is no more than 2 or 3 generations away from being completely forgotten. Completely forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah, there's where my shop is here in Pennsylvania, there's a couple of tombstones outside of it, and it was from a very prominent mining family, and they're falling over, and I can't push them back up because they don't...
Yeah, and then you can barely read the names. Or who among us has not had the experience, say, of a school that you went to or someplace where you worked, and it's been around for a long time, and you walk up and down some hallway, and there's a bunch of pictures, photographs of this dude was the president of this school in, 1937. And there's I guess that's why that building's got that name. That's the dude it's named after. And then you go and you read a little bit and you realize, he was really important in his day. And yet nobody cares anymore. And at the time he probably thought he was pretty something.
By the tail in that picture?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And yet now he's completely forgotten. He's just a black and white photo on a wall. Some old dead dude who used to work here.
Wow. What a gift to be able to ponder that.
Well, yeah, we're maudlin about it, but that's exactly right,
His nature demands from him and will not cease to do so throughout his life that he inscribe something permanent onto the surface of a transitory material. And going on. The experience becomes acute when a young person asks himself what he will want to achieve in his lifetime. This is a question that an artist, for instance, experiences the most consciously and thus with the most torment. But an artisan, a farmer, or a merchant also feels some of it. Man wants to create something permanent, something above time, to make a definitive statement that would be the expression of his personal uniqueness. Of course, at times, one also has to do something purely transitory, like decorating a room for a feast. And one can put something of one's personality into such a thing, too. But the longing in man goes farther. No one wants to inscribe on pure transitoriness the work by which he tries to express himself fully. Rather, a form should be molded that, quote, no time and no power will break up, says Goethe.
Yeah, Goethe.
My German. Larry's helping me with my German.
Urwörter. Orfischdaimon. Yeah. Anyway, we're not going to go into the German.
Good, because it's Greek to me. Still, he knows that everything earthly is drawn on the sand of transitoriness. Irretrievable masterpieces, if we look just at the history of art, have been destroyed forever. Let us gather some of the great losses. Almost everything by Sappho, let me know if I pronounce anything wrong, by Aeschylus and Sophocles. In music, many operas by Monteverdi, over 20 opuses by Bach, Schubert's Gastein Symphony. In art, all Greek painting, quite a lot of Romanesque painting, Leonardo's Last Supper, and Ghazali's Pisan frescoes during the last World War, which also claimed German Romantics. In architecture, how many ruins from Borobudur to Cluny? How much that has collapsed in earthquakes? How much where only an eerie effect is left, like the Parthenon or the Great Sphinx? So he's done a good job of pointing out that a lot of people's work, dedicated people who spent years and years and years and maybe generations working on things are
he mentions
gone.
the Sphinx. I mean, think of the Great Pyramids, too. All of those great Neolithic, monuments like that were an attempt to transcribe something permanent into our transitoriness. What's more permanent than that giant pyramid, in Giza? And yet it, too, will someday be dust.
Yeah. I took a picture of that when I was there. There was a Kentucky Fried Chicken across the street, and I took a picture of the pyramid's reflection in the plate glass window of the Kentucky Fried Chicken. Maybe it was a prophetic picture pointing out that ultimately, in the history of time, this is going to be really no more lasting than this Kentucky Fried Chicken across the street.
I wonder if the pharaohs understood when they were building those things. Someday there's going to be a fast food chicken joint.
If we could just hang in there long enough, we could run across the street and snag some chicken. And the Sphinx, they told the tour guide told me that like Napoleon. I don't know if this might be a myth or what, because I think I've heard it debunked since then. But that Napoleon's army were just like taking pot shots at the Sphinx and stuff like that when they were there.
That could possibly be. Yeah, it could possibly be. I mean, when you think about it, for example, the Vatican just announced that's going to be doing a big renovation of Bernini's Baldacchino, which is the great big canopy over the main altar at St. Peter's. And the big pillars are made out of bronze, but here's what's interesting about it. The bronze, and these things were built in the 1600s, the bronze was pilfered from the Pantheon.
No way.
They took bronze columns out of the Pantheon and melted the bronze down to make the Baldacchino over and I assume that 10,000 years from now, just maybe that Baldacchino will be rubble as well. Who knows?
It'll be in Hollywood. Be melted down and turned into Golden Globes. What is with the Last Supper? Is that lost? The Last Supper? I
think the original. I mean, the Last Supper we have, of course, is a painting on a wall.
Yeah, I have it in my house.
Yeah,
I own it.
I thought that too when I read this. What's he talking about? We have the Last Supper, but it could be maybe Leonardo. Maybe there was an original painting of the Last Supper that was also on this wall, but I don't know.
My daughter told me when she was in Italy, and maybe this, I don't know, you would know because you've been there, but that like it was some nuns like put a doorway in the middle of the Last Supper or something? Did you ever hear anything like that? Like
no. No, it wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me.
That's not a dig on nuns.
Yeah, they paved paradise and put up a parking lot.
Peoples that understood they were building for their gods could clear away what was destroyed because they realized they could build something better. And they did, too. We have grown poor in this respect, and thus we simply restore. We cover destroyed Gothic vaults with concrete, as long as we have the money. In the East, there is already a very limited availability of funds, which, of course, does not mean that the artists of our time do not wish to say a single valid word, just like their predecessors. It is only harder for them because the works of technology geared toward the purpose of the day claim so much of contemporary man's mental, inventive, and creative energy that it becomes more difficult to make oneself heard and seen over that. But great works of art, even in our time, prove that those who create have not lost the courage to fight against transitoriness. It's kind of a sad time to be a really motivated.
So in the midst of all of this meditation upon how transitory things are, one of the things that Balthazar is driving for here, he says, but great works of art, even in our time, prove that those who create have not lost the courage to fight against transitoriness. He's not saying, oh, woe is us, it's dust in the wind, we are all worms, and so on. He sees great dignity and value and significance and meaning in the fact that in the face of this transitoriness, we continue to try and find something transcendent, something that goes beyond death, something that goes beyond decay. We want something to be present, and he's, of course, going to build on this now, all right? Yeah. Yes, we live under the regime of death and transitory decay. Yes, we try to overcome it in all of these ways that are eventually short-circuited. But the fact that we keep going and keep going speaks to this dynamism of the human spirit that is telling us something really important.
All right. Besides art, another contradiction in human existence needs to be remembered. We mentioned its emergence in young love. It becomes striking in marriage, where marriage is still taken seriously. Two people decide to belong to each other, quote, for life. But they do this in view of an eternity, for they want to love each other definitively. For life does not mean at all, I want to love you as long as you are alive. After that, I will be free again. They mean the contradiction of something permanent within the limits of time. One of the two will die before the other, and it is always a painful paradox when, out of love, the dying one releases the survivor. You will marry again, won't you? Otherwise, you'll be so lonely. But emphasizing the contradiction that man wants to, and also ought to, achieve something immortal in transitoriness is not yet the final word. The contradiction is not only irrevocable, it possesses a disconcerting necessity, even fruitfulness. George Simmel, and after him Max Scheler, have brought this out. For the very reason that my time limit is finite, I have to, and am able to, create within it something for which I take full responsibility. If it continued interminably, I could revoke each of my decisions at some point. Everything would be reversible, would go around in circles. Limits acquire meaning only if they run in one direction toward a goal and an end. In German, one says,
Im Sinn des Uhrzeigers.
In the clockwise sense.
Yeah, im Sinn des Uhrzeigers.
In French, one says,
Sens unique.
Only direction, for a one-way street. And it is precisely because I know that I am free to choose, to create a work, to love a person, that I affirm my awareness of the uniqueness of my finite life.
This is key here. This is very important because what he's pointing out is that the fact that we die isn't simply all doom and gloom and the inscription of utter transitoriness upon us. In some ways, death is a mercy that God has extended to us because of our sins. Because were our lives not terminal in some sense, then we would be tempted never to do anything.
Yeah, we're tempted enough as it is.
We would be tempted to simply not. It is the fact that we know there's a limit that the clock is ticking, that we try to inscribe something of value and importance. And more than just, we keep talking of value and importance, what you're really trying to do is to, in a sense, say something definitive about yourself, to make a definitive stance about who I am, what I stand for, and eventually stood for. And in a way that if you just lived on and on and on, you could eventually take back someday.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, I said that 300,000 years ago, but that was so 300,000 years ago. Now I think different, and so that's why he says, ultimately, everything is got to have, all limits have to have a direction in some sense, otherwise you're going in circles. So this is important. The limitations of death impose upon us the contradiction of transitoriness, but then also liberate us to, in a sense, understand the definitive nature of the decisions we're making right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and when he says, because he goes for, there's this quick transition kind of from, the contradiction is not only irrevocable, it possesses a disconcerting necessity, even fruitfulness. That just sort of like turns it right there from
That's
like
right.
this, and yet, like I don't want to be like, I don't want to be directed toward this horror, but if I'm not directed at all.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I face the contradiction of my existence squarely. For I know that the matter into which I want to sink a definitive form will not hold up, whether it be the matter with which I am working as a craftsman, or the matter of my hours ticking away. And it will be taken away from me on my last day with absolute certainty. What I will be able to say then, at best, is, in my clearest moments, in my positive, basic decisions, I would have liked to make of my existence something lasting, valid, even though I knew that most of this existence would at last disintegrate into trash and decay. Not only my biological, but also my personal life, which I have tried to shape into something meaningful, will end. I see in no way how this task would have been solvable at all, but I will not claim either that I have done everything I could have done. However, would I not have arrived at the same point, even if I had applied myself in a better way?
Yeah, I think this before we end the last paragraph here in this section, I think this is really important that we understand this point about, I knew that most of this existence would at last disintegrate into trash and decay. What he's trying to say is, the only thing ultimately that's going to remain are the decisions that I make that in a sense create a form to who I am, to my own existence, that my existence conceived of as a set of achievements is going to just disintegrate and dissolve and go away. Yeah. Even my own children and so forth. I mean, the saying, he's not dead so long as we remember him. And he's really dead. And we remember him. And eventually there won't be anybody around to even remember him because you won't be around. And soon you won't be remembered either. And all of a sudden you just be an old black and white. That's great-great-great-grandpa Chapp there. As
if somebody's even going to bust that out.
Yeah, exactly. And, and it's, okay, that's nice. Who cares?
Yeah.
So anyway, last paragraph.
Yeah. Yeah, but what do you think of that? Where he's talking about, he sheds light on the sense that, like, the best you can say is I tried. I really tried.
Yeah.
But I didn't try quite as hard as I could have. But really, what difference does that even make?
Yeah, because would I not have arrived at the same point even if I had applied myself in a better way?
Yeah.
Yeah, as anybody's ever been around the dying knows. I mean, a dying person never sits around and says, oh, gee, I wish I had done a little more of this or a little more of that, and in the sense of achievements in life, or owned this car, gone on that trip. No, it's all about relationships when you're dying. It's all and in the sense, the important ones that define who you are, that define the form that you've made of your life. What dying people want is to make amends for any estrangement they might have with a child or a parent or something like that.
Yeah.
Or even a close dear friend that they were estranged from, that kind of thing.
They want communion.
Yeah, they do. They want communion. This gives great beauty to the Catholic doctrine of the communion of saints. I've said this quite often, in some of the dying people that I've worked with way back in the days when I was a seminarian. I ran across Protestants who were dying who didn't believe in the communion of saints. But then when I would point out to them, what it is that you most fear about dying is being cut off from the communion you have with the people that you care about and you love. And all that the Catholic teaching is saying is that you will not be cut off from the people that you love, There's a great line from the prophet Isaiah that you pray in morning prayer sometimes where he says that when you come to the end of your life, it's like the weaver who severs the last thread, which is a really, really haunting image. In other words, the tapestry is complete. Done. I've severed the last thread, and now I'm going to tie it off. And that's your life. It's like a weaver who has severed the last thread. And yet the tapestry is there. And the tapestry was formed out of the various relations you've made with other persons. Let's go back to the smile that awakens the child. Throughout your life, relationship. And then as you're dying, you don't want to be cut off from those.
And the temptation to weave that tapestry out of stuff that it's not going to endure. And then there's just a few little threads blowing around as opposed to even a small, well-constructed tapestry that endures. Okay, last paragraph of this first chapter. What an abyss of ignorance awaits us at the end of our life, or rather rules it in its entirety. We do not need to call it resignation or call our work burying our heads in the sand, just an ignorance of the consuming fire into which we have built all that we have undertaken. Should the sentiment running underneath everything, then, not be that of anxiety? Well, if that's it, that was definitely it.
Balthasar wrote, he wrote another book called The Christian and Anxiety. And there was a famous Protestant philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard, that Balthasar really liked. And Kierkegaard wrote a famous book on anxiety and what kind of anxiousness and anxiety are allowable to a Christian in an ideal sense, and which are sinful, which are bad. So Balthasar's written an entire book on, on the Christian and anxiety.
I'd like to read that.
His conclusion is that a certain kind of anxiety, which is really our participation in the sufferings of Christ, which is our empathetic, compassionate entering into the sufferings of others, that's Christian. But an anxiety that is an anxiousness in the face of the transitoriness of life bespeaks a fundamental lack of faith.
And because it's kind of it should be kind of a catalyst for us to say, the question shouldn't be a rhetorical one that says, is this all there is? And then we say, I guess it is, and I'm anxious. It should be, is this all there is? And then prayer and study and love and
is this all there is? And the answer is no. This is not all there is. You've got to get to
the next step. But we so often stop at that in a materialist, with a materialist worldview. And then you have now we have pharmaceutical companies that are like, we'll take care of the anxiety. That's the thing that tends to lead us to dig deeper. And somebody might just say, oh, this is upsetting to you, so we'll lift the upset.
Yeah, because of this abyss of ignorance he talks about here. Right? We live in this sort of no man's land, and that gives us anxiety. But Balthasar is absolutely relentless as this book goes on, and in his book on anxiety, he's relentless when he points out that the Christian cannot stop with this anxiety. Okay. The Christian cannot stop here. The path of sanctity demands that we press on, and he is absolutely relentless in this drumbeat of pressing on beyond the anxiety into the abyss of Christ's love.
And he presses on in this book, in the next chapter, into the chapter 2 titled Serenity.
Serenity.
And so this is looking at, from a largely human vantage point, what can be done about this anxiety-inducing condition of mortality that we find ourselves.
Yeah, and it's funny, though, because every time I hear this word serenity, I think of the episode of Seinfeld where George's dad have the therapy. It goes back to what you were talking about, the pill that takes away our anxieties. You know, and George's dad had this stupid thing where he would scream out, "Serenity now!"
Right? In a really angry voice.
In a really angry voice to get rid of his anger. And I think George at one point even said, "Dad, I don't think you're supposed to scream that like that." You know?
Yeah, like it's just a command, like it's a button.
Yeah, serenity now! All right. And so I remember when I first saw the title of this chapter, Serenity, I just thought of, you know, Frank Costanza. But that goes to your point, though, about the kind of serenity Balthasar is going to be talking about here is not the quick fix, therapeutic elimination of anxiety through some sort of technique of some kind.
Even from like a human, like even before he gets to Christ, even it's still not a quick fix. It's still a hard.
That's right.
Trying to go for a hard-earned. How do we find serenity in this?
That's right. That's right.
A horrible contradiction.
And there's going to be attempts, whether it's like, you know, Stoicism or Eastern mysticism, those kinds of things, materialism, that go beyond a pill or go beyond serenity now.
There's still effort.
But there's effort there, and there's serious endeavors, but there's deficiencies to them all.
All right. Let's follow along with him. So chapter 2, Serenity. We do not wish to jump from this hopelessness immediately into what is Christian, as if it were nothing but a Deus ex machina, and that's machina. Sorry, that's the technique where you just resolve everything by saying, "Oh, God takes care of it," right? Like,
yeah, a Deus ex machina is just sort of a magical crane that comes in to lift the debris out of the whatever.
Such a thing would come to us only from the outside and from above. And what kind of a solution to the human contradiction would that be? The attempt must be ventured to find within finiteness a direction in which we may look, and from which something like a dawn, like the starting point of an answer, may appear to us. Everyone who wants to achieve something definitive in his life, be it some love or some achievement, needs to give himself. He has to pay with himself for what he wants to purchase. Even and especially if he wants to express himself as powerfully as possible, he needs to let go of himself for the sake of his expression. The young person who envisions 1,000 possibilities for the fulfillment of his life needs to make his choice. For what do I want to give up my 1,000 possibilities when things get serious? For what will I sacrifice my almighty liberty now that it is imperative to do the one thing necessary? Kierkegaard, in his work Either Or, has described the aesthetic existence, unwilling to decide, with all the glamour of Mozart's Don Giovanni, who remains only a dilettante in love and is therefore taken by the devil in the end. The second stage of life is, then, that of a modest marriage, that has nothing brilliant about it, just a quiet glow from within that others see almost by accident. We do not need to talk here yet about the third, religious state in Kierkegaard's stages on life's way. To stay with the young person, he understands instinctively that in choosing one reality instead of 1,000 possibilities lies not only the seriousness, but also the dignity of life. An instinct, an inner listening, prompts him to trust himself to a vocation, to choose a profession, and for that he needs to let go of himself.
Stop there a second. This is so critical. As somebody who taught young people for many, many years at DeSales University, there's a generational component here, but there's also something perennial. And it is that youth is a time for making choices, and all of life lies before you. So there's a certain kind of human being for whom it's overwhelming, and the choice can never be made. Yeah. You're presented with a kind of choice paralysis.
Yeah.
We all know the kind of person here. They flit from one thing to another, to another, to another. They never sink their roots deeply into anything. They start something, and they're all enthusiastic about it, and 3 years later they're bored with it, and they're moving on to something else. And that's true of their relationships as well as their jobs. And then all of a sudden they wake up, and they're 48 years old and spouseless, or they've been through 3 spouses, okay, and don't have a suitable career or whatever. This is what Balthasar's talking about here. And it's later, another central aspect of his thinking is how important the concept of vocation and mission is to our relationship with God. Ultimately, this involves a death. every single choice you make means this option and not this other. And so you see as you get older and older and over in life, right, the window of your choices gets narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And that's a kind of death.
Yeah.
A kind of death.
And do you think that, I mean, there's always been some of that, but the more materialistic the world gets, the more that those flames are fanned of indecision, just because it's
because in a materialistic existence as well, newer is always better.
That's true.
Because it's shinier, it's glitzier, it's
still exciting,
more exciting. And that's why marriages don't last. Because romance fades, and so then you're just left with the nitty-gritty of living with another human being for whom you may not feel those passionate things that you did when you were 22. And so the eye wanders, and there's adultery and cheating and all that kind of thing. Or you reach this conclusion, I married the wrong person. I should have married this other person over here that I just met last week.
Oh, it's tragic, and it's
and then you marry that person, you realize, oh my goodness, I'm on wife number 10 and I still haven't gotten it right.
Odds are this time I'll have to, right? Oh.
Yeah,
so it's feelings-based, a lot of it, too, as far as just like not having a sense of, well, there's a right way to do things, and so you try to do something that's virtuous, that's something that's objectively virtuous, something that feels like the right thing. And this is a little off the topic, but one of my children, it was a smart thing to say, but I'm glad she's not still there. But she said she couldn't tell the difference between. She thought that her feelings and her conscience were the same thing. Like, this is when she was a younger person, but it's like, wow, I think that is actually
that's profound.
A huge problem for the world. Like,
with the profound that she realized that, right?
Like,
my feelings are not my conscience.
She believed me that they weren't the same, but she didn't see it. And it's a hard thing to describe, especially when we're using. I mean, in our capitalist, materialist, overconsumptive society, we're constantly trying to keep people acting on their feelings because that's how you sell
it's a sentimentalist culture that simply wants to dwell in the range of emotions. We see this inability to choose as well, not just in relationships, but in the people who can't stay with a particular job/vocation, right? Or you see, no matter what job they have, they're always complaining about it. It's never good enough. The kind of person you meet at work, everybody knows this kind of person at work. The constant grumbler, the constant complainer. Every boss is an idiot. Every coworker's a jerk. And no matter what job they've ever had in life, apparently every single manager is an idiot, and every single coworker who ever lived at any place at any time is a jerk.
Don't hire that guy.
And then and it's because you don't really think that. What it bespeaks is simply a fundamental agitation, annoyance, and dissatisfaction with where you are.
Yeah, and maybe that you're not getting, that you're not getting that sense of what you're doing is important because of the attitude you're bringing to it. Because nothing is ultimately, as we're talking about here, as important as you feel like it ought to be. So you're taking that feeling and saying, this isn't important. I was made for more. There's got to be something.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
But you could do any job and do it, with
and this is going to be Balthazar's point. Yeah. Right.
Okay. Let us say at the same time, other than by such active letting go of oneself, no one will find himself. Not on a meditation cushion, distancing himself from everything around him, will his self become comprehensible to him. He will at best meet nothingness, and it would be a pity if he were to recognize his self in that, but only in abandoning himself to a cause or to a person. The ability to let go is the principle of all achievement and of all loving possession. The work shall be, even if I perish because of it. You shall be, even if it cost my life. Great art was bought in no other way. In vain did the Pope call the one absorbed in his work to come down finally from the scaffolding to the floor of the Sistine Chapel. This letting go is not a mere ruse in order to possess oneself more deeply in the achievement, as is clearly shown in the attitude of true love.
No, this is key. What he's pointing out here is that when the artist or the lover or whatever job you're in, if you lose yourself in it, it's telling us something important about the nature of a relationship with the good. and goodness. You're not simply losing yourself in it as a way of furthering your own sense of importance or whatever. You're losing yourself in it because you sense the importance of the object that you're working. Michelangelo wasn't just painting the Sistine Chapel in order to get, worldly glory. He was absorbed in the beauty of what he was making.
There's an aspect of communion in that.
Oh, absolutely.
The work.
That's the being invited in. Balthasar was huge on the concept of beauty. That beauty speaks to that one of God's fundamental characteristics is beauty, in the sense that God attracts.
Okay, so you're participating in something beautiful.
You
you're
are
close to
participating in something beautiful that draws you out of yourself and into the sheer goodness of the good, the beautifulness of the beautiful, and so on, for its own sake.
We wish to maintain that this most beautiful and most fruitful human attitude was, after all, meant by what German medieval mysticism extolled in the word serenity, and called the most important art in life. In death, we will be automatically, of necessity, led into full serenity, because we will be ordered to let all things and ourselves go.
I think here, too, he's talking about German medieval mysticism, extolled in the word serenity. All the rage these days in some circles are the Rhineland mystics, many of whom were women, like Hildegard of Bingen.
Yeah.
And they had strong, even though they were Catholics, they had strong pantheistic tendencies to want to really emphasize our oneness with everything. And that is the oceanic experience of the mystic, that sense that everything is connected on a very, very, very deep level. And so I think what he's trying to say here is the German mystics, Catholic mystics, could be misunderstood in a pantheistic way, but what they were really, really about was, in a sense, seeking to achieve the serenity of recognizing participation, as you just said.
So in a very deep, deep place, that is incredible and profound, but in a shallow place, it's all...
In a shallow way, it's like, I'm one with the tree. I'm just, dude, let's toke this weed and become one with the lava lamp. It's
trying to take a big old shortcut to something really meaningful.
It's a lot deeper than that,
Is there perhaps a way naturally and freely to practice this fundamental act throughout life? Is there perhaps a way naturally and freely to practice this fundamental act throughout life? This question is not really easy to answer because we have a feeling that it is two quite different things that are talked about here. One leads into the joy of possession by the very fact that I seek not myself, but the other for his own sake, while the other robs me of any possession. And from this potential ambiguity of serenity, a very dangerous way, an attempt to make both unambiguous, presents itself to us. We need to dwell on that for a moment. Throughout all the history of philosophy and other wisdom of the world, the teaching of the dying Socrates is repeated to us. Philosophy or wisdom is in the end nothing but the lifelong practice of death. This can be true, but it can also be completely false. It is true wherever my innermost decision to achieve or to love is not turned back onto myself, wherever I am looking not for self-realization, but for the objective value of the work or the person, and I'm also willing to promote and nurture that value by my substance. It is by my perishing that the essential that I mean will bear fruit. This can truly be the highest all-human wisdom of life, and this wisdom will confirm the Christian way beyond itself and make it complete. But many a time that same maxim has also been incorrectly understood and practiced. Wherever serenity has been interpreted as distancing oneself from things or persons that are transient anyway, as seen through the inner vanity of everything worldly and finite. This may have rather varying degrees of intensity. It is most intensively proclaimed by Eastern wisdom, to which everything finite and limited is only appearance and deception, illusion, maya. Everything finite and limited, including, therefore, my own self, is, if interpreted correctly, only an ambition to be and to have, and, therefore, needs to be renounced.
Okay, let's stop there for clearly what he's saying here. I mean, Socrates said all of life is, in a sense, is the practice of death, getting ready for death, and and dying into the transitoriness of existence. And Balthasar says, okay, Socrates could be onto something really profoundly Christian here in a pre-Christian way, which is I find myself in losing myself, but I lose myself precisely in the goodness of the object, the goodness of the person I'm loving, or that I've committed myself to.
So it's more active? It's an act of giving?
It's an act of giving yourself over, dying to yourself for the sake of the good that you are losing yourself in. But that's different. There's another kind of in apatheia, or apathy, as the Greeks would call it, or indifference, that is very unchristian. That I prepare for my death by simply saying, everything stinks, man. It's all just nothing, and nothing matters. Right. Nothing really, like Bohemian Rhapsody. Nothing really matters to me. Anyone can see that. So it's a kind of dust in the wind mentality. And obviously the transitoriness of life, and this is his point. I mean, there's a certain fundamental human perception here. Everything is transitory. He did begin with this. Yeah. Okay. But when we give ourselves into the transitory, when we write ourselves into it, are we engaged in an act of futility that we need to draw back from and say the act of inscribing ourselves into transitoriness is madness, is silliness, we just need to back away. Let's go into and this is one of the points of Zen Buddhism. Yeah. Maya, M-A-Y-A. The world is of things, the world of stuff, the world of beautiful objects, including yourself, is illusion. There's only the oneness of being. Differentiation is a fall, is a declension. The Buddhists have a word in the Hindus is what Advaita, which is non-dualism. The quest of nirvana, the quest of all sort of reincarnations, everything is to discover that there is no dualism of any kind. There's no differentiation of any kind. There's only Atman is Brahman. The soul is God. God is the soul. Everything is one. Nothing is, so what you end, it's like, okay, a drop of water goes into the ocean. It doesn't stop being water, but it stops being a drop of water. Yeah. Okay, so yourself falls into the ocean of being. You don't stop being what you are, spirit, but you do stop being you. Okay, and so that points to the transitoriness of everything individual, of everything discrete, of everything finite. And he's saying this kind of Eastern mysticism is not open to the Christian. And I'm belaboring this point because there are many, many Christians, Catholics especially, who are drawn to the Catholic monastic tradition, who fall into the trap of this sort of Eastern meditation, Eastern mysticism. There are some insights we can gain from Eastern, even a monk like Thomas Merton saw the great value of certain insights of the Eastern mystics, the Buddhist mystics. I'm not saying there isn't. But we have to be very cautious and careful here that we're not spinning this web, this tale of all is illusion. Yeah, that's all is transitory, but you're not transitory. And there is a moment of eternity in time that we have to discover that is not in spite of time and in spite of finite things, but in and through them. In and through their particularity, not behind their particularity.
That's a world of difference in just a very small, different way of perceiving the way those words are hit, and a world of difference in what it means for the value of our lives. Yeah,
exactly. When God speaks to me through you, it's precisely through you that God is speaking to me. And God would not be speaking to me if you, in all the formal structure of your concrete finite existence, did not exist. This is the sacramental worldview. The view that everything that is an iconic, epiphanic eruption into time and space of something of God, but not behind the icon, but in and through the individual beauty of the icon. This is what differentiates Christian mysticism from Eastern monastic mysticism. Christian mysticism might begin by a withdrawal from the things of the world, only to withdraw from the false consciousness of wanting to possess things, to desire and want them to be mine. All right? You draw back from that, but in order to, in a sense, possess them in a dispossessive way, spiritually.
There's an understandable reaction to our possessiveness that would make you want to just dispossess everything.
That's right.
And yet, there's so much more vulnerability in the Christian worldview that between you and a personal God involved in this, as opposed to you are just kind of maybe not even really noticed as that drop in the ocean. But no, maybe that's a big part of it too. Is the responsibility.
That's right. You don't want to be responsible.
I sure don't. But I'm working on it.
Balthazar points out that with regard to our proper disposition towards the things of this world, and God speaking to us through them, is that the sinful person seeks to grasp, seeks to acquire. It's an acquisitive mentality, a possessive, grasping mentality. And this is where the insights of Buddhist mysticism are corresponding with ours.
Because we're looking for a false security in
exactly.
that grasping?
The false self seeks to possess, seeks to acquire, and thus ends up with nothing. Okay? The Christian, though, is going to look at that and say, instead of then simply saying, I need to completely back away then from the world of things, because it's a world of illusions that I just simply seek to acquire. No. The Christian needs to back away instead of having a grasping, acquisitive disposition. I need to back away and begin to contemplatively view everything as gift. Things which are
Receiving
gifted to me. So receptivity is the goal of Christian contemplation. Not apatheia, not apathy, not indifference. Receptivity. Receptiveness to the gift of everything.
Okay, everything needs only an ambition to be and to have, and therefore needs to be renounced, like the world around me. Today, this alleged wisdom is more in vogue and stronger again than ever. It is all the more tempting since it needs only to point to the contradiction in existence. It is sunyata, emptiness. Our longing for permanent fulfillment is exposed as thirst that cannot be quenched other than by abandoning the self-will, by reaching selflessness.
Atman, Japanese muga. Okay. It's all the same thing, the quest for the selfless self.
Selfless self.
The selfless self, yeah.
So we see, sorry, I'm belaboring what you said before, but with the curiosity with Eastern mysticism, that's a response to grasping stuff that is of no value ultimately.
Yes.
Okay, so it's totally understandable. It's just God wants to give us so much more.
There are forms, though, I want to be very clear about this, a Buddhist and even Hindu mysticism that have this negative element that we're talking about here. But I think also, especially after the encounter with Christianity, Buddhism has evolved. You find elements of different kinds of Buddhism now that want to emphasize that the quest is simply the quest for a truer and deeper self, what they call the selfless self, as I just said. The self beyond the self that exists in the world of illusion and Maya and differentiation. It's still not completely properly Christian in a receptiveness towards gift, and yet it's groping its way there.
Can we say groping toward the unsinful self?
The unsinful self, the non-acquisitive, non-grasping self. There was a movie that came out in 2000. I looked it up before we got a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah.
And it was about, I can't go into the whole thing here now, but it was about Buddhism and Zen masters and all their exploits. And the central characters was this male Zen master, and there was a female monk. And they both sought this Buddhist ideal of detachment and nirvana and so on. But they clearly also sort of had feelings for each other. Well, long story short, the male monk, gets poisoned at the end. And the antidote for the poison is miles and miles away. And he's with this female monk. And they both know now that he's going to die. Mm-hmm. And she then begins to counsel him and say, okay, you need to go into your space. In other words, meditate, detach, learn, in a sense, go into the state of nirvana, indifference towards all things. Right. And he said no. What he wanted was her. He wanted to kiss her. So this was profound, because what it showed was what he sought was love. Wow. What he sought was love. And ultimately, as he approached death, he did not want to seek complete apatheia, complete apathy, indifference. He wanted relationality. He wanted communion. He wanted to affirm something good and beautiful, something concrete. In other words, he became not lustful but receptive of gift, and he acknowledged the gift. Here's existence, the gift that is you.
All right, I have to watch a movie from 2000. I didn't see any movies in 2000.
I didn't see many.
In a milder form, this has been repeated by Stoicism, according to which the four basic passions, aversion and delight, fear and desire, are to be eradicated from the soul so that the inner man can rest in the calm of apatheia, hence the word apathy. But can such a person still venture into true creative work, genuine love? The most subtle form is probably the Socratic Platonic, which persuades us that we do not need to fear death, since only an element that is alien to us in the end, the mortal body, falls away from us, and we, freed from it, can finally be unhindered as immortal souls. German Enlightenment and German idealism are full of this teaching. In death, the butterfly flies off, leaving behind the chrysalis. But the Stoa, too, has influenced Christian thought and feeling with lasting effect. First the Church Fathers, then the Middle Ages, with its treatises on the vanity of the world, and most of all, the Baroque age. This manifold and yet concentric interpretation of serenity is the most persistent enemy, not only of Christianity, but of true humanity in general, since, when applied seriously, it paralyzes any true commitment in earthly transient life, in work as well as in love. But it is not yet clear how one can escape this interpretation. In other words, how commitment and serenity can be combined. This is a question to man as such, a humanistic question. Nevertheless, a satisfactory answer is given only by the Christian interpretation of life.
It's very, very interesting here. He's pointing out that Stoicism, it said, everything in the world is transitory, so to heck with it. The only thing that's important is your soul, which is going to be like a canary that flies out of the birdcage at the end when it gets released from the body. Plato had a famous play on words, soma, sema. Soma is body. Sema is the word for tomb. The body is a tomb for the soul. Mm-hmm. This is a classic Stoic theme as well, and especially you see it in Middle Platonism. And Middle Platonism influenced the early Christian church fathers a lot, and into the medieval era. So you do see, and this is somewhat controversial here, but Balthasar's point is that even early Christianity, you have to be a little bit careful with the church fathers and the medievals, despite how profound they are not perfect, and they have the taint of their times. Okay. Let's put it that way. Just as we have the taint of our times, they had the taint of their times. And one of those taints was a kind of disparagement of bodiliness, of things, of the world of transitory things. And Balthasar, this is fundamentally not a Christian disposition. And he even goes on to critique, you see this in the spirituality of the Baroque era, and certain Carmelite spiritualities. Perhaps that's what he's talking about. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila, certain Baroque types that want to emphasize this flight from the world, this fleeing the world in a bad sense. I don't think he's claiming that, say, Francis de Sales or Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross, that they themselves are guilty of this, but that there is a taint of this there. And perhaps somewhat Balthasar's Jesuitness is coming out. He did eventually leave the Jesuit order. He stayed a priest, but he left the Jesuit. But the spirituality of Ignatius of Loyola, who started the Jesuits, was much more one of finding Christ through immersion in the world. Mm-hmm. than in retraction from the world. And this is not, Balthasar was a huge believer in contemplative vocations. He's not arguing against like the Poor Clares or Carthusians or the Carmelites. He's not arguing against that kind of spirituality.
Well, you can see how it could creep in very easily.
But he's arguing against distortions that can easily creep into that kind of mentality.
Yeah, and you might be drawn to that life or that worldview if you had things that you didn't work out as far as how you felt about your body or bodily existence.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard having a body.
Sure as heck is. It'd be great if we could just, the heck with this thing. And yet what we're going to eventually discover is how wonderful having a body is.
Yeah, hard and bad.
We hardly even know the gloriousness of bodliness yet. We will only know that in our resurrected state. The glories of having a body.
I love this summation at the end that he says, how commitment and serenity can be combined. If you want to escape everything, well, you can't really commit to anything. And if you're going to commit to something, anxiety is going to have lots of inroads. So
that's right.
How are you going to work it out?
So you're in a conundrum here. You can either, because at the end of the day too, right? You can withdraw from everything and you're still going to have anxiety.
Yes.
Because you cannot withdraw completely from the world. The only way to completely withdraw from the world is to kill yourself, seriously. And I think that's probably why in many ways people do commit suicide, sadly. It's because life is so painful. Yeah. They have no serenity. It's nothing but anxiety all the way down. And the only way out is death.
Yeah. Right. And all that fear really springs from death. So it's a crazy paradox that fear of death leads people to kill themselves, and it does.
Yeah, it does. Fear of death causes them to see death in everything.
Yeah, right. It's rather one big death now
everything,
and get it over with. And all these
so let's just get it over
constantly.
with. Let's just get it over with. It's death turtles all the way down, so let's just do it.
Oh, God,
it robs everything of meaning. And this is Balthasar's point, right? Yeah. When you perceive the ubiquity of death, not just in terms of the terminal nature of our life, but how death permeates everything in the fact that everything is transitory and goes away. This is exactly, it presents us with this conundrum.
Yeah.
Right? We can either go all the way and say, well, there's no meaning to anything at all then, and I'm going to try and withdraw into some kind of stoicism or Eastern mysticism, or nihilism, despair. I'm just going to kill myself. Or
desperate for a savior.
Or you can become a hearer of the word, a searcher for a savior.
This is so rich. I thought we would get a little further than this, but let's call it there.
I think we're going to have to.
With the yearning. So the next chapter is titled Christ. And
that's right. We're 1/3 of the way through. So this might take 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Although the last, maybe we can get through it in the next one. I don't know. We'll see.
Well, thank you very much, Larry, for your illumination that you bring to this. It's a huge blessing to me to be able to read this book with you. And I would like to, anyone who's listening to this, we're recording this in our coffin shop here in Scranton, Pennsylvania, northeastern Pennsylvania. And I would just like to ask you, if you like this, or you like what we're doing, to check out where this all springs from, my interest in death. I've been building coffins for 15 years. And I have a business called Marion Caskets. And we are in the lining room of the coffin shop right now recording this. And my website is marioncaskets.com, M-A-R-I-A-N, caskets.com. And a casket is a big purchase, and it's a one-time purchase. But if you'd like to support our work, we also make some other things out of wood, like our Divine Mercy crosses, and proceeds from that also benefit the Crisis Pregnancy Center, Providence Pregnancy Center, that has sprung up right next door to our shop here in one of the poorest zip codes in Pennsylvania. So thanks for listening, and look forward to going deeper and deeper into this mystery out of which God brings so much hope.
Thank you.